Format: News Flash. Category: News Flash. Word count: 1650 words. Estimated duration: 3 minutes. America just put Japan on a trade war hit list. Not China, not Vietnam. Japan, its most cooperative economic ally, the country that pledged $400 billion in US investments, that quietly accepted a 3% tariff without retaliating, that sent its prime minister to Washington to smooth things over. On March 3, Nissen Niruluk, the US trade representative, launched a Section 1650 investigation into Japan for structural manufacturing overcapacity. The same legal weapon America once aimed at China is now pointed at Tokyo.
This is not a drill, and it tells you everything about where US trade policy is heading. Let's back up 2 weeks before the investigation.
On February, Arshanar, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, struck down President Trump's IEEPA tariffs, the sweeping emergency power tariffs that had been the backbone of his trade war strategy. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a Sedniksnuniji law, the court ruled, does not give the president authority to unilaterally impose tariffs as a tool of trade policy. The justices effectively pulled the rug out from under the entire tariff architecture.
Within hours, the White House responded. Trump announced a new 1% global tariff under Section 1650 of the Trade Act and declared that the administration would launch fresh country-specific investigations under Section 1650, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told reporters that combining these new authorities will result in virtually unchanged tariff revenue in Isen Islukden. Translation: the administration found Plan B before the ink was dry on the court ruling.
Section 1650 is an older but powerful tool. Unlike IEEPA, it is explicitly designed for trade disputes. The president doesn't need to declare a national emergency. He just needs to demonstrate that a trading partner's practices are unreasonable or discriminatory and burden U.S. commerce. The investigations take time, typically 6 to 12 months, but the tariff authority at the end is real and has already survived legal challenges from the first Trump term.
On March years, the U.S. steer pulled the trigger. 16 economies, including Japan, were named in a formal Federal Register notice. The charge: structural excess capacity in manufacturing, producing more goods than they can consume domestically, flooding global markets and displacing American production.
Here is the question everyone is asking in Tokyo right now: why Japan? Japan isn't China. It doesn't have state-owned enterprises dumping subsidized steel onto world markets. It doesn't have the kind of command economy that the term overcapacity was designed to describe. Japanese companies compete on quality, not volume. Japan's market share in semiconductors, automobiles, and machine tools is built on technology, not government subsidies.
But look at the sectors the USTR named as subjects of the investigation: steel, automobiles, batteries, electronics, semiconductors, ships, machine tools, robotics, chemicals. Those are not abstract categories. Those are Japan's core export industries, the sectors that made Japan the third largest economy on Earth.
The USTR's specific allegation is that Japan continues to operate unprofitable firms propped up by non-market forces, a claim that would apply more cleanly to China than to Japan. But Japan is on the list, and under Section 1650, being on the list is what matters.
There's also a legal logic at work. The administration wants tariff authority that is bulletproof, authority that has survived court challenges before. Section 1650 tariffs on China from Trump's first term held up through multiple court challenges and were largely kept in place by the Biden administration. That's the playbook: broad investigations, expedited timelines, maximum legal cover.
Japan's government understood this almost immediately. The Japan Times reported on March 3 that Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi was planning to raise the investigation directly with Trump during her scheduled Washington visit. She arrived on March 8, just 1 week after the Federal Register notice.
But the visit didn't go according to plan. The trip, which was supposed to be a bilateral trade reset, was dominated by the US-Israel war against Iran. Trade got squeezed to the margins. Takaichi left Washington without a commitment that Japan would be treated differently from the other Showa economies under investigation.
Here is what this investigation reveals about Japan's strategic position, and it's more complicated than the headlines suggest. Japan spent the past year being a model U.S. economic partner. In July, Nissan Arsavu Tokyo signed a bilateral framework agreement, accepted a 15% tariff on Japanese goods, a reduction from Trump's initial 4% demand, and pledged 4% for strategic U.S. investments across semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, critical minerals, energy, and shipbuilding. That's not a small number.
Then in March, whilst Takaichi and Treasury Secretary Besant announced a second tranche of that investment up to $100 billion by G. Vernova Hitachi to build small modular reactors in Tennessee and Alabama, and $100 billion in natural gas generation in Pennsylvania and Texas. Japan was delivering visibly and publicly.
None of that stopped the Section Sembi investigation. This is the insight: the Japan factor is built for quiet compliance is not the same as immunity.
The U.S. trade apparatus, now running on Section 100E rather than IEEPA, is structurally designed to be broad. The USTR initiated investigations into SRIC economies simultaneously. The investigation is less about Japan specifically doing something wrong and more about building a legal foundation for tariffs that will hold up in court. Japan happens to have large manufacturing sectors that produce goods America also wants to protect. The investigation logic follows from there.
For Japanese executives in the automobile, steel, and semiconductor industries, this creates a planning nightmare. Toyota, Nippon Steel, and Tokyo Electron, to name just 3 companies squarely in the crosshairs, are now operating in an environment where the tariff rate could change significantly by July versus 1.
Automobile tariffs are especially sensitive. Under the Ichan Arsawu Framework Agreement, Japan accepted 20% tariffs on cars, down from 10%. If the Section Sumbert Ichi investigation results in additional sector-specific tariffs on automobiles, that rate could climb again. Toyota sold roughly 10 million vehicles in the U.S. last year. The arithmetic on a tariff increase gets ugly fast.
Shipbuilding is another flashpoint. The USTR named ships as one of the targeted sectors. Japan is the world's 3rd largest shipbuilder, behind China and South Korea. Whether Japan's shipbuilding industry, which competes on commercial vessels rather than subsidized bulk carriers, actually constitutes overcapacity in the way the investigation describes is a legal question that will be litigated at the May hearings.
The April Sherwood deadline for written comments has passed. More than our parties filed submissions. The May 5-8 hearings at the U.S. International Trade Commission in Washington will be the next major milestone. Japanese industry groups, the Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association, the Japan Iron and Steel Federation, are expected to argue that Japan's manufacturing model does not fit the overcapacity definition. Whether the U.S. Steel agrees, or whether political and tariff revenue logic overrides the technical arguments, will determine the outcome.
There's a phrase that comes up repeatedly in analysis of Japan's trade situation: creative compliance. Japan has historically been very good at finding ways to give the US what it demands symbolically while protecting core industrial interests. The $100 billion investment pledge is a version of this. It's real money going to real projects, but the timeline is long and the implementation is largely in Japanese companies' hands.
That strategy worked during the IEEPA era. It is less clear it works under Section 100 yet. The Section 100E process has its own legal logic, its own timeline, and its own investigative standards. Investment pledges and diplomatic goodwill don't appear as evidence in a Federal Register proceeding.
Japan now faces a choice that no amount of creative diplomacy can fully resolve. It can argue at the hearings that its manufacturing model doesn't meet the legal definition of overcapacity, which is true but may not be persuasive in a politically charged process. It can offer additional concessions, more U.S. investment, more agricultural purchases, more energy contracts, and hope that the administration treats the investigation as a negotiating lever rather than a policy end in itself. Or it can prepare for additional tariffs and start modeling the impact on its export sectors.
The Council on Foreign Relations described the current situation bluntly as a U.S.-Japan trade impasse as of April. Nisen nisrulktain. That's a striking phrase for two countries that are nominally close allies, both with troops stationed in the same locations, both facing the same concerns about China's military posture in East Asia.
Watch the May hearings. Watch whether any Japanese industry sectors get explicitly carved out before July. And watch the yen, which has been tracking these trade developments closely, a sign that the market understands what the investigation is actually about.
Japan played by the rules, wrote the check, and still got the investigation notice. That's the Japan factor for today. Word count approximately. Sen Lotbak Sisha words. Estimated duration. Risti minutes. Format news flash.